Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 314. Are you calm in a crisis? What happens after the crisis is over? There may be more administrative overhead to deal with afterward than you thought, especially for the ADHD brain. Skye Waterson is a former academic turned business owner and ADHD coach who joins us in this series of discussions to provide a different perspective on ADHD with practical strategies that can help all of us. If you missed part 1 of our discussion with Skye in episode 313, we talked about dopamine levels, how to manage them better, motivation, and the importance of developing routines. We talked about some of the challenges of working in an office environment as well as working from home for the ADHD brain. And we talked about procrastination as well as the importance of developing a prioritization filter to help you focus. This week in part 2 of our discussion with Skye, we're going to talk about managing stressful events like job loss, some ideas on ways to set goals, the importance of environmental fit for the neurodiverse individual, and how you might be able to determine that in an interview situation. And then Skye's also going to share her story of walking away from academia to become an entrepreneur. Let's get you straight to the action as we share part 2 of our discussion with Skye Waterson. I know we talked about stress a little bit earlier and how the ADHD brain handles it. I'd like to talk about stress in the context of the current job market. A lot of our listeners are seeing these layoffs happening across tech in the last couple of years. They seem to be continuing on somewhat of a trend, and it's pretty discouraging for a lot of folks out there to see it. But I'm just wondering, how is the impact of stressful situations and then even these traumatic situations on the ADHD brain a little bit different than someone who does not have ADHD?
There's no conclusive thing that I can think of in the research that I've done that we experience stress in a different way, like more negatively or anything like that. Because of course you're going to talk about PTSD, you're going to talk about autism, you're going to talk about a lot of things where stress can be very overwhelming. What I would come back to with ADHD is that we have impulsivity struggles and we have executive functioning struggles. And so it comes back to this idea of your ADHD all the time. When something stressful happens to you when you have ADHD, for example, so maybe somebody rear ends your car, maybe you rear end somebody else's car, you have to deal with all of the emotional regulation, all of the thinking, and sometimes with ADHD that can be worse because we can have rejection sensitivity. There's evidence we can struggle with self-criticism because we've received more pieces of criticism growing up, even positive criticism. And so all those things can mean that it hits harder, but that's the same as well if you maybe have PTSD or you have other mental health struggles, they could also struggle. So all those people could struggle more with that side of it. But when you have ADHD now, you have to call the insurance company. You have to figure out what to do with the car you currently have, which might be on the side of the road. And especially once the dopamine is gone, you might be good in the crisis, but post-crisis, you now have to pick up all of this executive functioning task work and do emotions. And so you might be struggling way longer than somebody else might be struggling because you don't get to just go, well, that sucked. And then I went out and I chatted to a friend and I spoke to my therapist and then I had a break and I felt better, because now you have to deal with all this actual admin work as well.
That makes sense to me. And if we put that in the context of someone losing their job, they've got to figure out what to do with the last bit of time they have at this company. I mean, it may have been immediate. They may have a couple weeks to go or a few days to go and figure out what to do there. And then, did I update my resume? Do I have LinkedIn up to date?
100%.
What should I do next?
I've worked with a lot of people in that job space because essentially what you're doing is you're starting a small business called finding another job. It's really complicated. I mean, selfishly, one of the things I would say is use that time to start a side business. Like, I'll help you. I love it because then you're in much more control of your life. I've worked with people who have side businesses and full-time businesses as well. It's a lot of work, but if you can do it, it's always good. If you have an inconsistent revenue stream, which I did, I was an academic. It was very contract to contract. But if you're focusing just on the business as well, just like getting a new job, then really it does have to become a system that you break down and you say, okay, what is my goal? My goal is to get this job. What are the steps that make this goal inevitable in a day? So in a day, I get up and I message this many people and I send this many resumes and I check up on this many things and make it an achievable goal for you to hit those things and focus on that and give yourself dopamine for that rather than my goal is to wake up every morning and try and get a job, because that's very, very difficult and not very fun from an emotional point of view.
I like the defined endpoint you're mentioning there. Give yourself that target. And I'm wondering, because you've just gone through this stressful situation, well, I mean, it just began, right? It just made the emotional dysregulation bomb go off in your head. Would that indicate that you might need to infuse yourself with even more dopamine to keep the motivation up to do this day in and day out because of that compelling event?
Yeah, definitely. And also, you don't have to immediately start. Sometimes we can go straight into crisis mode. Sometimes we're using the dopamine of the stressful event. So we're like, I don't know how long this is going to last. So I'm going to plan and try and get a whole job before the energy. So you'll like do like a 24-hour. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone do this, but like, you know, they find out they've lost their job and like they've spent like 24 hours just crazy doing things and then they finally crash, you know. To try and avoid that, what I tend to recommend is in the moment when it happens, you want to go ahead. And if you knew that this might happen, it can be good to like prepare this in advance. You want to go ahead and do something grounding. Things you liked as a kid are very helpful. You know, give yourself Chinese food, watch a movie with a friend, you know, things like that could be really good. But have a time in your calendar that you've blocked out that is planned to find another job. Like give yourself like a 2-hour window, put it in your calendar like you'd put a doctor's appointment. Take yourself to a coffee shop if that's going to help you stay motivated to do it, especially if you've been used to a working environment. And then once you're there, give yourself a really nice cup of coffee, maybe a chocolate biscuit with this one, and then go ahead and plan it out. And if you need help with that, Goblin Tools is a really helpful app. It's an AI app that breaks things down for you. It's actually designed for ADHD. It's free. So you could search anything. You could search find another job in X industry, in X country with X whatever, and it will break down the steps of that. And then if you can turn that into a daily rhythm and then focus on the input, not the output, then you can kind of get yourself into like a little system where that's inevitably going to be what happens. You're going to find another job.
Is it harder to break into those steps from large problem you need to solve to individual tasks for the ADHD brain? Is that part of the reason you went there?
Yes. Sorry, I missed that step. You're right. Yes, ADHD, one of the executive functioning struggles we have is working memory. It's really hard to break things down, and there's a lot of hidden subtasks. I always use the example of somebody buying a new rug. You have to find it. You have to source it. You have to figure out what to do with the old one. You have to get it. You have to pick it up. You have to take it upstairs. You know, there's like 10 different tasks before you've even finished that. And that's just a rug. You know, somebody might buy that on eBay or something, you know, just, you know, without really thinking about it. So if you can imagine that for that simple task, how much more complicated is it to get a job? So it used to be that I would sit down with someone and we would really break it down. Thankfully, now we have AI, which is actually very, very helpful for a lot of people with ADHD and taking a lot of that executive functioning struggle. And so Goblin Tools, spelt like the goblin, is a very helpful way to break that down for you.
Oh, wow. I have seen this happen in real time. I don't know how to get from here to here.
Yeah.
With my daughter, I might be helping her with a project at school. And like, well, what do you need to do first?
Yeah.
well, you can't do that without doing this. So you need to do those two things.
Exactly. And she's like, I think I have to clean my room. People will run off and go do something else.
But once she has the list, then it becomes less of the dog sled break where you have to break out of the non-movement.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a list, a daily routine, a reward, enough, like making it a realistic thing. Also, Goblin Tools will estimate how long it thinks it's going to take you to do this thing. It's not great at estimating, but at least when you look at it, you're like, it's not going to take that long. And then you're like negotiating with an actual thing rather than thinking it's all going to happen tomorrow.
Right. When situations happen, stressful situations, maybe it's death of a family member, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, is it easier for the ADHD brain to find closure after those stressful events than otherwise?
I don't think so. In terms of the emotional part of it, like finding closure and things like that, there's no evidence that I've seen of that being different from a neurotypical in terms of how you relate to it. It's more the case that the admin of all of these things can tend to linger for a lot longer for people who are neurodiverse. So they might still have boxes of things that they haven't organized, for example, for years after other people would have organized them.
And that just kind of lingers in your head and pops back to the surface every now and then?
Yeah, it just kind of hangs out there, which is why often with people I recommend they do the prioritization filter because it incorporates everything that, including that way back in your brain, which is supposed to be used for the strengths of ADHD, which can be creative problem solving and original thinking and all that kind of stuff. Your brain is just holding on like, don't forget to organize that box. It's like very frustrating.
Oh, that's true. We didn't even talk about the strengths of the ADHD brain. How could you see that play out in the world of technology? I know you had a great discussion with Lisa Ballard not too long ago that I would definitely link to in the show notes for people to go back and listen to.
Yeah, Lisa's the best. One of my oldest clients. There are a ton of strengths. So when I work with people who have ADHD, it's really about how do we mitigate the struggles so that we can focus on the strengths. We're not living a life of just mitigating the struggles. And sometimes people think that. But really with the strengths, it's like, okay, we know from the research that we're original thinkers. If you give a person with ADHD a task and an example of the task, people who are neurotypical will tend to iterate around that example. People who are ADHD will tend to be fully left field, be like, who cares about that example? I'm going to go over here and completely originally redesign this thing. They did that example with toys design. So you can sort of see how that would work well if you were in a workplace and you were solving a problem. One of the best things about ADHD in the technology space is that we are out-of-the-box thinkers. We love pulling a solution to a complex problem out that no one else has seen before. And we'll usually have an original perspective on why it exists or what we should do about it. So they're great people to have in the room when you are ideating, when you are problem solving, when you are bug fixing even, like all of those spaces.
Would that naturally lend itself to the theory that many entrepreneurs have ADHD? And that's part of the reason they became an entrepreneur?
I don't remember the exact stat, but it was over 100% likely. Like it was like crazy. The amount of people, like these days, often when people talk about entrepreneurship, I've been lucky enough to be in some cool circles of people who do that. They just assume people have ADHD rather than the other way around because it's so common. Entrepreneurs having ADHD is super common. And there's sort of two types. I'm going to call out the entrepreneurs for a second here. I hope you guys don't mind. There's kind of two types of entrepreneurs. There's like I have ADHD and I never really worked on it, but I managed to like focus in and not burn out or burn out only a little bit. And then I got successful enough that now I like run a business and I have other people helping me and I haven't actually sorted out my own ADHD. There's that person. And then there's the entrepreneur who like knows they have ADHD and it is a struggle and they are burning out and then they get the strategy and support. Both of them are still successful entrepreneurs at the end of the day. But those are kind of the two types of entrepreneurs that I see. And so sometimes people will say, oh, well, I have ADHD, but it doesn't affect me. And it's like, well, you should talk to the people in your office. It might.
Well, what do you think as an entrepreneur yourself? How can the entrepreneur stick to the business they decided to build and growing it without being distracted by something else or losing interest in this thing and wanting to do something else? Because one of the traits I think you had mentioned was completely losing interest in something after a time and seeking something new.
Yeah. I love that question. That is such a good question. One, it's hard. It's really hard.
I bet it is.
So one of the ways you can do this is you can, and actually I think I've spoken with some other ADHD entrepreneurs about this as well, is you can kind of only do things that are adding to what you're doing. So you can kind of say, okay, this is my field. I help people in the tech space. So if anything I decide to do, I'll do it only if it helps people in the tech space. But the other thing that I've also found particularly good is if you go ahead and set up a goal for yourself. So you say, okay, 25 years from now, I want to be in this position. So you go really far out. You imagine a really great life. And then you go, okay, well, in 5 years, I want to be here. So this is the target that I'm working on. And these are the goals. Actually giving yourself really good rewards attached to the goals can be really helpful. So rewarding yourself in that case is good, because even though I wouldn't say rewarding yourself in general is great with ADHD, if you can give yourself a big enough reward attached to a business goal, that seems to be helpful. It's really complicated to explain because there's so many pieces to it. You can always talk to me if you need to know more about it. But the best thing I could say is like some form of gamification is going to be necessary. Basically, in the same way as we do with getting a job, we want to turn it into something that you're doing every day that makes the process inevitable. There's rewards, and you're not getting your dopamine from your business. And that's really important because you're not always going to find that your business is a dopamine producing thing. It's cool if it is, but it won't always be the case. So you want to go ahead and add those additional sensory stimulations and other things to help you. And also tell people your goals. Keep yourself accountable. Having an EA can be really helpful because, if they know what your goals are and you say, we're going to write a book now or something like that, which I may or may not have done, then they'll be like, really? Because, I'm looking at your calendar and I have control of your emails and I don't think that this is a good idea. So having those kinds of external accountabilities, like bringing people around you, can be really helpful too.
Is there a way to have someone hold you accountable and not feel the shame of maybe not accomplishing your goal? If I set a goal for something and I can't ever do it, or I decide to abandon it, I might feel a sense of shame. With the emotional regulation challenge, does that sense of shame become more?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think that is a good point. I think when it comes to the goal, really what we want to do is we want to go in and say, okay, what is your goal? Because sometimes the problem is that you set a goal. If you've ever heard of the BHAG, like the big, hairy, audacious goal, that's a term in business. And so if you're thinking, okay, I want to set a huge goal, we're going to make $3 million in my business this year or something like that, then that goal, it's easier if it's a goal that doesn't have a timeline. So if you said to yourself, my goal is, let's say your nerd journey, right? And your goal is to become a nerd media empire. You're going to support nerds around the world and help them grow and develop. And that's your goal. And you want to do it with a stable business that allows you to spend time with your family and also allows you to meet your wants and needs. Most people have kind of that goal in business. That doesn't burn you out. If you said to an assistant, that's my goal, and you also ask them what their goal is, by the way, and make sure that you put their goal in your goal, like that's a really great way to connect the two things together. But if you're doing that, then if you said to somebody, hey, that's my goal, and maybe part of that, because we do want some kind of measure, is I want my business to hit 6 figures by the end of the year. That's my goal. If you don't hit 6 figures by the end of the year because something happened, it doesn't super matter because you're working to a 25-year goal, right? You're working to a media empire 25-year goal. This was just a bit of a valley year. And so you're still going towards the goal, but you're just adjusting the goalposts, when you get there. Don't adjust them prematurely because you never know what happens in the last quarter. That can be very helpful. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Having the long-term view and that progress is good. It sounds like you're also saying make sure and remind yourself of the progress that you have made.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it wasn't to the step you wanted. Well, I really wanted 1 million downloads per episode and I'm at 700,000.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I was.
Yeah. And then there's, the idea of it being a bit of a puzzle. So thinking about this is like, it's not a failure. It's just that this is a puzzle. And obviously I say this is a lot easier to do when you get out of the I need to make enough money to survive part of business. But usually when you're in a I need to make enough money to survive part of business, you have enough dopamine. So it's like that middle piece that can sometimes be the problem where you're scaling, you don't yet have the finances to bring other people on to support yourself to be able to get out of the things that you don't love. You're starting to do that, but you're in that complicated middle space.
Where your effort has to go up to make up for the fact that you're not quite big enough.
Exactly. You're like, there's that bit where there's no one and there's no money and it doesn't super matter what the goals are because you're just starting. No one will really notice. You can sort of play around in that space and figure it out. And when I did this for years, like before this business, I helped my husband run a different business, frozen food, and learned a lot. So there was a whole business journey there. And then you get the other side where you're like, okay, your business is like 6 figures or, it's got $1 million run rate or something really great. And you are now in a position where you can hire an EA, you can hire an executive, or you can hire, someone who can support you. That has its own problems. And, I can always talk about that. But the middle piece is often where people find themselves stuck. They've got something, it's making money, but they don't know how to hand off those tasks and at what order and how to focus to do the thing.
You wouldn't really call it a trough. You'd almost call it like the peak of exertion.
Yeah.
That you have to get past to walk down the other side.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I should have asked earlier in this conversation, why become an entrepreneur? What made you want to do it, Skye? How have you seen the challenges and strengths of having ADHD play out in your journey to now?
I love that question. So I was originally going for academia. That was my thing. Right from I was ducks in my school. I did all that stuff. And I wanted to be an academic. So I studied that. But once I was in the academic world, like doing a master's, doing all that kind of stuff, it was a lot of short-term contracts and, a lot of grant writing and a lot of admin and things like that. It's very different from what you might imagine. So it became quite clear to me that this wasn't necessarily going to be stable and it wasn't going to be even necessarily as free as I had kind of hoped from that kind of role. I didn't really know what to do about that, but I did start looking at entrepreneurship at that time. I loved art, and so I tried to sell a few paintings, and that didn't really work. But I was, I was sort of figuring it out.
Experimentation.
Yeah, experimentation, exactly. And then my boyfriend, now husband, who also has ADHD, actually was starting a business selling frozen food in New Zealand. And so I said, I'll help out. And so I learned a bit more and that gave me kind of my sea legs. The business, unfortunately, was part of the COVID shutdown.
Oh, no.
When you get told by the government that your business is now just fully unable to run. That happened, but it was okay. We did this business and it was really good. But I think it taught me a lot. And mostly it taught me, the thing I love about business is that no one tells you no. When you are in a workplace, and this kind of comes back to the idea of, you talked about getting let go. When you're in a workplace, you can do your absolute best. And you can still get fired or you can still not get the promotion. There can be politics, there could be other things. When you are running your own business, it's like sort of like a big giant puzzle. And so, yeah, someone can say no to this thing, but maybe you just need to rethink what you're doing, or maybe you need to talk to a different audience, or maybe you need to talk to more people or something like that. There's often a solution. There's something to do. And that for me was very, very good. So when I decided to start trying to be an ADHD coach, I didn't anticipate it becoming a big business, but I did hire a business coach because I knew from the previous one that those people are pretty important. And I hired an EA for 5 hours a week because I knew, again, that was pretty important. And so those two pieces really helped me to grow and develop, because I eventually decided to leave my PhD. And that was a really hard decision. It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make because I'd spent so long going down this track. And my supervisors actually supported me, and that really helped. Because if you know academia, we really we want our supervisors to be happy with us. So
of course,
they were supportive. They said, you can do another PhD, but you can't start another business. And, at least at the time, it felt like this amazing thing and this opportunity. It's been amazing. And now I get to do what I want, which is to say I still research academia. I have a researcher on staff who, sends me the newest articles. We have a podcast where we talk about the research that's coming out, just like you would in academia, and turn that into things that I teach people. And so in that way, it's been great because businesses are like this little interesting engine that you can craft to how you want to work, for example.
Yeah, you not only do you craft it to the way you want to work, but it sounds like you took the majority of the things you enjoyed about being in academia and put them, we'll just say, in a slightly different context or construct maybe around them, and fit it to the way you like to work.
Exactly.
And walking away from the PhD, that's kind of the sunk cost fallacy. I've put so much effort into this. If I walk away now, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
It's a really hard one.
For those of you who've done a PhD, I was at the all but dissertation stage, which means you've gone through the first year. They've said, yep, this is a good idea, done the research, and now you've gotten the research and now you're just writing it up. I didn't finish writing it up because that was kind of the thing. I had to do one of two. I had like two things that I was doing. I also had a very small baby. And that was the hardest decision. But sometimes, if you talk about saying that you're going to do something and then not doing it, I'm like a big blaring sign of somebody who did that. I said I was going to do a PhD and then I didn't finish it. But that's okay because long term, as part of my overall journey where I wanted to be, like you said, I still do the things I want to do. I just do them in a slightly different way. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I think it's easier if you think about the long-term goals.
Yeah. What are some of the things you wish you had asked about being an entrepreneur when you first started that you now know to be true?
Number one thing I wish I'd asked is, how do you make money? Because that was harder than it looked. I feel like I'm only just learning. Like, I feel like even now, and I built a business of 6 figures, and then somebody taught me how to do sales properly. And I was like, oh, I've been order taking this whole time. I didn't realize that you could do this to actually make sales. And so that would be my number one thing is, like, if you are doing a business, I assume that you have a product that you can sell, that you like doing. And I assume that you like the people you're working with, although you would be surprised. Like, if you don't like the people that you're selling to, you might want to rethink that. But at the end of the day, the number one thing you want to do is sell. So sales is super important. And I've had amazing business mentors throughout my career, and that's been the thing that has been most helpful. It's like, do you know how to sell something to someone? Or do you just go like, oh, well, maybe if you want it, I don't know, like, do you want, like, or do you know how to sell it? Because I was definitely that person when I started. Because I knew how to do academia. I could talk for ages, but I didn't know how to sell something. That was big.
It's a hard thing to put on the sales hat, I imagine, after not having worked in sales before.
I have a book that I read called Spin Selling, and I highly recommend anyone reads that book. But I've found putting on my psychologist hat was really helpful. So thinking about it more in terms of people have a problem, and if you have the solution to solve the problem, talking to them, making sure you understand their problem. If you ever do a consult with me, I don't do consults that much anymore, but if you do a consult with me, I'll like go through a survey with you, like, where are you on a 1 to 5 scale? So like, if somebody has this problem and you have the solution to this problem, then it's kind of your job to make sure you understand all the objections to the problem, make sure you understand, okay, do you have the time? Do you have the ability? Are you the decision maker in this scenario? And then offer them the thing. So when you think about it like that, I did clinical psychology in my undergrad. If you think about it from that perspective, I found that very much better than like sales.
If you are talking to someone and trying to sell them a product or service, in a lot of ways, you're conducting an interview and they're conducting an interview of you. And I guess you would say from both sides, it's a job interview because as an entrepreneur, business owner, you can choose what customers you want to work with and which ones you don't. And even if they want to work with you, you can still say no because they don't fit into whether it's the scale, the type of service.
Yeah. I have said no to people before. Usually I'll say no to people because they need more intensive mental health support. I would refer them on to somebody who does that. So yeah, in order to work with me, you do have to do some kind of qualification process, and that is part of it. It's obviously different if you're selling a low price product. I will say I only work and support people who do high ticket, high value products. And so pretty much everything has been like content creation, development, and just making things that help people. And if those people turn up in your life, saying to them, hey, do you want to do this thing? And then taking them through that process. And if they want it and they're a good fit, then giving them the thing. It feels very different, and it feels less like what you would expect traditional sales to be. But then if you like actually do the research and you read Spin Selling and you read all these books, you'll find out that actually, like, for very high level salespeople, this is what they're doing. It's not, this is actually what they're doing.
I like what you said about using content creation to show the proof of your expertise and the proof of your work, because that is actually a pattern we've seen in guests on our show who have gotten different jobs in a different area or become very high level individual contributors. Is they were creating some form of content, and that content could be a blog, it could be a podcast or a video, or maybe it was just them speaking at conferences to show their expertise, and that allowed them to get the job they wanted, or perhaps an unexpected opportunity came their way.
100%.
So I love that parallel in what you were doing. If we turn the angle of the interview just slightly, we were talking about, if you could interview yourself, what do you wish you had asked? If someone who's neurodiverse is in an interview situation, like they're in the interview process to try and get a job, are there some things that they can ask about to help them sniff out red flags of that work environment?
I don't know about the interview specifically. I think, in terms of sniffing out, it's tricky because obviously they're interviewing you. And so it comes, how are you going to ask them a question in a way that sniffs them out without them noticing that you're sniffing them out, because that's a red flag for them, blah, blah, blah. Things like that.
They should expect it,
They
right?
should expect it, but
I think they should expect it.
People will sometimes be like, I want the person who really wants it, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
So, but if we sort of don't think about it like that, then, a number one thing I would say is, like, what are your options? So if they have flexibility in their workplace, so if you said to them, if they said, hey, do you have any more questions? I would say, like, what are your different workplace options? So, like, what are the different ways that people in your office work is a question that I would ask. Because often with ADHD, the thing we're looking for is an environmental fit, not necessarily a product. Like, the thing you do is probably going to be the same. You probably have a good sense of what it is. What we want to know is, are you going to get dirty looks every time you put your headphones on? That's kind of the thing that happens a lot. So if you just said, oh, well, I'm really curious about the different ways people in your office work. Do some people, is everybody at their desk? Do people have, like, their own offices? Like, do people work from home? Like, what are the different options? And if they say, oh, well, there's a lot of different options. Some people will come in early. Some people will leave late. Some people will do this and that. Then you'll know, okay, environmentally speaking, this workplace, theoretically, I highly, highly recommend talking to somebody in the office if you really want to get the down low. Like, try and find somebody on LinkedIn and be like, hey, just asking. But if you're talking to them, at least you'll know that they are open to this idea of different times, different ways of working. And then you might also say, is the work project-based? Is it, like, repetitive? Like, things like that would be useful to know as well. Like, is this going to be something where you've got a deadline, or are you just going to get thrown different things every day from different departments? And both can be good, but depending on what you want.
Yeah, that's a good point. And should someone seek to share their neurodiversity in a job interview? Should they hold that back? Does it matter one way or another?
It's a really personal decision. So I wouldn't tell people what to do. Most of the time when I work with people, I'd say they don't share it initially, unless it's going to have a big effect on the workplace. And they will tend to share it once people have not gotten to know them as a person. The reason being, if you say I have ADHD and all they know about ADHD is there was that one kid in school when they were growing up that was really annoying, and they assume that now you are that one kid in school, then they don't even know what you mean. So instead of saying I have ADHD, you might say by the way, I work best in these environments. So you're giving them the context, the information about what ADHD is without saying, I have ADHD. Great example, I live in New Zealand. And you could think a whole bunch of things about that. And I don't know those things. You might say, oh, New Zealand, you must be a hobbit or something like that. And I'm like, I'm not actually.
You look taller than a hobbit.
Yeah, I am taller than a. So, then it becomes that conversation. And so instead of that, you might say, I have these characteristics, whatever it is that is important to you about expressing from the ADHD.
Oh, I like that. I work best in this type of environment. Does that fit with your idea of what work should be for this company?
I like a strict deadline, things like that. You might prefer to say that.
Okay. Maybe you say that to multiple people in the interview process, like the recruiter, the hiring manager, as you said, talking to other people on the team or in a different role than you that you might interact with, just to triangulate all the information as you go through. Because I suppose that even though a company as a whole might not advertise that they're super flexible, if you had the right manager for you on the right team, that could be okay.
That can be the tricky part with workplaces, because often they're team-based. Then you always hear like, well, this team is amazing, but that team sucks, So it really does depend. Different department managers have different rules. So sometimes it can be good to talk to somebody else in the thing or an adjacent one, just to figure it out. There's always like politics and things like that. But that can be really helpful.
Oh, this has been a very helpful conversation, Skye. I really appreciate you taking the time. Where can people go to learn more about what you do and find some more helpful resources, or if they want to reach out to you?
You can find me at unconventionalorganization.com. You can also find me on Instagram. That's the best way to reach out to me personally, at unconventionalorganization with an S. And we also have a podcast. It's called the ADHD Skills Lab. We interview amazing people with ADHD, like Lisa. And we also have a research recap episode where we will go through the latest research. We'll make it fun, I promise. And we'll talk about what you need to know.
That's awesome. I really appreciate, once again, you taking the time, reaching out, and being a guest on the show.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
I have to say, I love the phrase, make the goal inevitable in a day. In other words, you're setting yourself up so it's a given that you'll hit your goal. Now, Skye was talking about this in the context of looking for a new job. So developing systems, processes for finding that new job. What I heard was you need to develop a routine that you can do for a certain amount of time per day as you look for that job. And part of that does require breaking high-level tasks into smaller steps. I love the fact that Skye gave us a tool to use, Goblin Tools. We'll have to check that one out. If anybody out there has used it, drop us a line, nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com, and let us know how you use it. But we're developing a routine to do something that's achievable within the time we've set to work on this thing. And I actually think this development of systems and processes translates into a routine for the way we handle the interview process. If we incorporate some of those suggestions for asking about the type of work environment we'd be going into and making sure that it's the right fit to work with how we work and how our brain works, you can have your go-to questions ready, plan it in advance, and as Skye said, you don't have to say, I have ADHD or whatever it is in the interview. You can ask your questions specifically and talk about how you like to work best. There have been a lot of discussions with guests about putting a significant amount of time into something and then walking away from it. Skye shared her story about walking away from academia after being so close to that PhD. And she said it was one of the hardest decisions she ever had to make. But what helped her get past it was looking at that experience within the context of a much longer goal, a longer term, longer time horizon thing that she wanted to do. And that was develop this business that she had a great opportunity to start. So maybe that is a way to help us gain perspective just in general, taking that bigger picture, longer term view of things. And I feel like I heard this on an episode of the Truth, Lies, and Workplace Culture podcast at some point about how no experience is wasted experience. The time she spent in academia wasn't wasted. She learned how to research. She did a lot of writing. Well, guess what? She still writes a lot. She's developed all this content that she said is part of the way she generates leads for her business. So she's still using those skills and that experience as an entrepreneur. So don't think that if you have to make the difficult decision to walk away from something, that all is lost or you wasted your time. I walked away from teaching math after 3.5 years. And honestly, the things I learned doing that have helped me ever since. It wasn't wasted time. Seth Godin refers to deciding to stop doing something as a gift to your future self. Maybe there's some perspective for you today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Skye. If you did, could you rate us 5 stars out there on Apple Podcasts and Spotify? Perhaps leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell us what you most enjoyed about this discussion with Skye. We'll catch you next time.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.